What have I done? My husband found my affair's Johnson toy in my suitcase after my business trip. What have I done? I've made the worst mistake in my life, Redditors. Everything has been ruined because of one small slip-up. My husband found out I was having an affair with another man because he saw a Johnson toy in my suitcase after I got back from my business trip. I hadn't even known I had left it in my suitcase after my trip. But what had he been finding in my suitcase in the first place? Why couldn't he have let the sleeping dog lie? Now my marriage was lost and ruined, and my reputation was also ruined. I don't think I'll be able to show my face in front of my friends again. My husband had destroyed my life all because he found out I had an affair. I just needed a place to rant, and this seemed like the perfect place. My name is Gwen, and I'm 29 years old. I was a top thriving businesswoman before my husband decided to ruin my life as revenge for cheating on him, and I don't have a career path anymore. My husband's name is Kelvin, and he's 35 years old. I had met Kelvin at a bar at my cousin's wedding 6 years ago. He had been a distant friend of the bride. I think they had dated once. My cousin had been the groom, by the way, so you all don't get it confused. I had bumped into him when he was fetching a drink from the bar at the place where the bride and groom had decided to have their reception. It had been a deja by experience, like I had met him somewhere before. Anyway, I liked him because I thought he had a nice mouth, and I initiated talk with him, and that was how we began talking. I found out he was a financial analyst and was working at a bank. I never liked bankers. My ex before my husband had been studying to work at a bank. I think he had wanted to be a broker or something related. He was conceited and thought the whole world revolved around him, and that was how most of them behaved if you think deep. So I hadn't really been interested in continuing conversations with my husband after the wedding, as I thought he was going to be exactly like that. I didn't like people who thought the world revolved around them. But it turned out my husband hadn't been done with me. He had asked my cousin for my number. That had been quite brave, I'll say. And my cousin had given him the number. I had received my husband's call, and he had cracked a joke, and I thought maybe I can give him a chance. I loved funny people. When my husband and I had started talking, I had just been fresh out of college and job hunting. I had studied architecture and wanted to make surreal buildings that would make someone question if they had been designed by the human mind. I had been young and had a dream. Then my husband had come into the mix. He had caught me on the brink of my career, and I think that was what had made me resent him in our marriage. And because of that, I had ruined our marriage and in turn my life and the career I had so cherished. I had started dating my husband 3 months after my cousin had ratted out my number like he was selling me off. Kelvin and I had dated for 1 year. We hadn't had sex because he was kind of religious. Well, not that he was religious, his parents were religious people. And guess what? Kelvin still lived with his parents while we had been dating. This had been someone who was working for a bank. He had said he wanted to save money and didn't want to waste resources until he was ready to settle down. I don't know how I had fallen for him or how I had decided to get with him. I had just liked his personality, but my husband had a strong hand on money. He didn't like to spend unless you gave him a well-detailed report on why you were spending the money and how you were going to spend the money. I had noticed that trait when we had been dating, but somehow I had overlooked it. I guess another thing that had made me resent my marriage was because I had been rushed into it. Everyone in my family had gotten married. My cousins, both the ones that I was older than and the ones that were older than me, were all married. And as the only child in my family, it felt like I was bringing my parents shame just because I hadn't gotten married. So I had taken my relationship with my husband seriously, even though all the red flags were lining up themselves so clearly. When my husband had proposed, I had said yes, and then we had gotten married. I had gotten married to him even though I didn't feel deeply enough for him, and we hadn't even had sex. On our wedding night, I discovered my husband's Johnson was small, like not even up to 5 inches. The S*X had been terrible that night, and it was from then on I began to regret getting married to him. I know I'm a terrible person, but what is marriage without good sex? And I had been a good wife. I had been faithful to him and hadn't gone looking elsewhere until things changed in my life, but I'm getting to that. My husband and I got married in a small ceremony with our friends and family. I had just been trying to save face. That could be the only reason why I had married. My husband wasn't a bad person. It was just because I had been forced into marriage with him. It was just the fact that I had done it to get people off my back and maybe get a feeling of what marriage was like. But my wedding night, I was so done. By my first year of marriage, after our honeymoon, I reduced having coitus with my husband. And luckily, he hadn't been big on getting things done between the sheets, so avoiding it had gone unnoticed with him. By our second year of marriage, we abandoned the thought of having sex at all and just pursued our different career path. I had just gotten a job at an architectural firm and was trying to work my way into everyone's good books. I was the newbie, so everyone was on the lookout for me not to ruin anything or chase away potential clients. I had worked hard enough to earn my top position as one of the firm's major design contractors. This was happening by my 5th year of marriage. This was when my problem with my husband began to develop into something that couldn't easily be passed off as nothing. It became the elephant in the room. He complained about every single thing I did, how late I came back from work, how we hadn't been having a tumble in the sheets. He began acting weird and asking me who I was cheating on him with if I wasn't having sex with him. Mind you, by this time I hadn't even started cheating, although it had crossed my mind 1,000 times, but I hadn't done it. Then my husband started suggesting I was cheating on him. He became quite paranoid with it even. I wasn't cheating on him then, but he had begun losing relevance in my eyes. I was gaining power in my office and I became noticed by my boss. This was how everything began. Yes, the person I'd had an affair with was my boss at the office, Sumi Lowell. I had bagged a top client in my office and I was being crowned Employee of the Year for the 2nd time in a row. Then my boss stepped in and handed me the award, something that had never been done since the foundation of our firm. That was how my boss and I became close. Still, I had never thought of cheating on my husband, even though he became irritating to look at each passing day. My boss was someone I had admired from afar right from the time I had been employed into my firm, and I finally got the opportunity to be working closely with him. No, I wasn't going to let my husband get in the way of that. He was adamant about me quitting my job because he didn't like how much time I spent away from the house when I was supposed to be the ultimate caretaker of the home. That was what his mother had put in his head most definitely. I hadn't even bothered replying to him with an answer and had continued with my life. He still ranted every time I got back late from work, but he couldn't stop me from working unless he locked me up, and that would have landed his ass in jail when I called the police. Luckily, it hadn't gotten to that. In fact, he stopped complaining about my work when he began having issues with his own workplace. That had been hilarious. He would come home late from work and go straight to bed. He began asking me for money to further his investments and promised he would pay me back, but then never did. He was becoming a little irritating to watch, frankly, and I think this was what pushed me to start sleeping with my boss. But what had been the pushing clause had been a few little drinks, and the fact that my husband lost his job. LOL, the irony, right? My husband had come back home and trashed the whole house when he had lost his job. I know you had all been expecting me to be the supportive wife, and you know not to rub it in my husband's face that he had lost his job, and I hadn't lost mine even though he had threatened me that he wanted me to quit. Well, I was sorry to disappoint you, but I had rubbed it in my husband's face. I had rubbed it in his face a lot of times. He had always told me how he could provide for the family and had always pushed at me to quit my job, and now he was depending on me to pay the bills. Did you know he even had the audacity to borrow money from me? This had caused a huge problem between us. One evening, as I had gotten back from work late, my husband had been waiting for me in the living room. He wanted to set out on his own business venture, and he wanted to borrow about 10,000 grand from me, the same man that had told me not to work Mao. The first thing he did when I got home was take my bag from me and set it on the table. Then he guided me to the dining room where he had set up a table for him and I. My husband was acting like a true gentleman, all because he wanted me to give him money. It was all giving pathetic in my eye, but I couldn't let him know that. I pretended to love the meal even though it tasted terrible, and answered every question he asked me about work and everything in between. This was the first time my husband was pretending to even be interested in my career ever since I started working at my firm. I had answered all his questions politely without prodding him to get to the point. I deserved an award for that. Then my husband had gotten down to the chase. He didn't like to sit at home and do nothing while I provided for the family. It seemed his family and pride had gotten to him because he had lost his job for about 2 months and hadn't done anything about it until that moment. So he needed money to start up a new company, and he needed 10 grand. I wasn't so bad. I didn't outrightly tell him no, or rub it in his face that he had told me to quit my job sometime before. I had told him I could only get him $5,000 and my husband had erupted in a tantrum. According to him, what was the use of the job I was doing if it didn't have 10 grand at my beck and call? And he was my husband. Anything I had was his, so he had a right to all the money I had, and he knew I had more than $5,000 to give to him. I didn't even know how to begin laughing at that statement. My husband's reputation shriveled up in my eyes because I was now better than him, LOL. I had what he wanted. I was better than him. I had the power. And it got to my head and I lost my husband. Well, it wasn't as if our marriage wasn't on the brink of doom anyway. But if I had not allowed my pride and quest for career power get in the way, I could have still been married. Anyway, I jeopardized my marriage big time. I told my husband that I had only $5,000 to give to him, and if he didn't want it, he could go cry in a trash bag or something. Then I had left the dining room. Ever since that day, I didn't like to look my husband in the face or even want to be in the same room with him because I had this notion in my head that I was better than him. Worst mistake of my life because I got what I was looking for and I fumbled every other thing and ruined it all in the process. In marriage, it's always the little things. The love first of all, the friendship next, and then the respect that bound two people together in perfect holy matrimony. Once all of that was gone, there was literally nothing holding people together again. I had lost the love and friendship part for Kelvin by our fourth year of marriage, LOL. By the time he had lost his job, the respect I had for him had vanished into thin air. So to me, we had just been two people waiting in line for that one thread that would make the other snap, and we would go our separate ways. The thread was already thin, and I guess this was what had pushed me to cheat on my husband. Even my husband had noticed that I was starting to lose the respect I had for him ever since he had asked me for money. So he had invited his mother over to try to put in my place. My husband's mother came over to spend a week with us, but it had turned into 1 month and 2. She thought she could scold me all the while I had been the one providing for her son and I in our own house. At first, my husband hadn't even told his mom that he had lost his job. He had wanted to save face. I'm trying to narrate all the things that had pushed me into getting into an affair with my boss. So you all wouldn't think I had just decided to wake up OKE morning and cheat on my husband. It had been the little things. His mother had come to my house and acted all high and mighty that it was her son that owned everything and she was entitled to having things done her way. I let it slide over and over and had just concentrated on getting in my boss' good side and not caring what was happening at home. Until her problems and canoodling became too much. She started questioning me as to why I was always coming home late and brought back the theory my husband had concluded so long ago that I was cheating on him. Every night for her stay, she would wait at the door until I got home and she would start bashing me that her son deserved better. And after all the things he was providing for me, I was cheating on him in the name of work. And then I just snapped. I told her son hadn't seen the insides of an office since he was fired about 2 months ago, and that I was the one who had been paying all the bills. The rent, the groceries, the water bill. I was paying for everything. And if she didn't want to be kicked out of the house by this night, she should shut her mouth about me and learn some respect. Yes, I had actually said that. The power had gotten to my head at this point, and they had all seemed like beggars who had been beneath me. Honestly, I hadn't known what I was thinking. My husband had fumed and ranted, but he couldn't kick me out of the house because he needed me, truth he told. So I had thought to myself, if they were so convinced that I was cheating, let me go ahead and prove them right. Like I said, I really don't know what had gotten into me. At work, I had been promoted again to the firm's most wanted architectural contractor, and I was busy in and out attending to clients, building my portfolio, raising more money literally. Then I had started spending more and more time with my boss, and he was getting to be more and more attractive to me with each day we spent together. I was love-deprived and in need of a good tumble in between the sheets, and everything my boss seemed to do was very sensual. I had tried to fight it. I had actually tried to stay loyal, although I thought that divorce was going to be inevitable for my husband and I. I just hadn't known that my life would take an awful twist. I started spending more and more time with my boss in his office behind closed doors. He always made sure I was okay and comfortable and never too stressed, and let's say I had fallen for his antics. Big mistake. He was everything I had wanted in a man if I hadn't been partially rushed into marriage by every person getting married. I had put off my attraction to my boss for a while until I couldn't. I started sleeping with him, and it was everything I had ever thought about S*X. It was great and good, but that hadn't been the only thing. We went out on dates, romantic dates, parks. The office knew there was something going on with us. However, none of them knew I was married. My boss didn't know I was married, and I didn't know if he was married either. We had just been going with the flow. He gave me more gigs, and I always made sure to do a sound job at convincing the clients, and deals were signed. And then he rewarded me by giving me more clients. Everything was going perfectly for me at work. At home, not so much. My husband's mother has still been staying with us, and even though I had put her in her place, I didn't like the idea of her being around my space. She was always on the lookout whenever I got home late, maybe hoping to find me come home with my affair and then catch me red-handed in the act. She didn't get to have the opportunity to do that. My husband, on the other hand, had traveled for a trip to set up his startup. So it had just been his mother and I didn't spend much time in the house anyway. I knew she had been reporting to my husband about how late I came back from work and how early I was out of the house in the morning, but I couldn't care less. What she did with her son didn't matter to me then, and it didn't matter to me. LOL, it mattered to me in the end, and time told my story. Anyway, before I was humiliated, things had been going great at work and in my love life, my husband not included. Then my boss and affair had been like it was time to take my talent to global levels. This was how I began traveling with him, going on business trips without my husband's permission. I hadn't meant to start it like that. I had been excited to tell my husband that I was taking my talents global and one more step away from achieving my dream of being a renowned architect. But then, I had overheard him and his mother gossiping one evening when I had gotten back home late and let myself in with my key. I had heard them in my husband's mother's bedroom talking about how I was letting it get to my head and I wasn't even all that. My husband's mother was advising him to divorce me and be done with it. Apparently his startup was coming along nicely, so he didn't need me anymore with the show of attitude I was giving. Well, I didn't need to tell him that I was going to be going for trips to sign contracts that will get me a lot of deals. I didn't need him so he could go and blast himself. This was how the going on trips behind his back began. I don't know how I had managed to pull it off, by the way. Maybe it was because he didn't even care for me, and that was how I had gone on each trip without being detected. They had just assumed that I was sleeping at the office, or when my husband had decided to be bothered, I had lied and said that I was staying at my friend's place, and he never questioned it. I didn't mind, though. I was having fun on my trips. I was signing deals and meeting people that would take my career to the top. I was having mind-blowing S*X, and I had everything I had ever wanted. Or so I thought, until my whole world came crashing down. No, it didn't begin at my husband finding the Johnson toy my affair used to bring me pleasure. My whole life began falling apart when my affair decided he would play me dirty. I had never thought I would get played in the entirety of my life. Then my husband finished up the work after finding out I had cheated on him. My boss has been taking me on trips and I had been getting clients to the firm and they had been signing deals. But I hadn't known I had been the joke. My boss was making a lot of money from the deals but had been underpaying me. As if that hadn't been enough, he had come to me and told me that he needed money for the expansion of the firm, and since I was every bit a founding part of the firm, and he couldn't do it without me. So he had asked me to chip in on the acquisition of land. I gave this man everything I had. I had never even thought of doing this for my husband, but I had willingly given him all the money I had. He said he was going to do it and then pay off our remaining salaries and pay me back once the firm expansion kicked off. He even promised me that he would make me the head of the branch he was trying to build up, and I had believed him. How stupid could I have been? I had believed all the lies he had sold me. I had believed everything because I had been sexually in love with him and thought that maybe it was the love that I hadn't had for my husband that I had for him. So I was willing to do anything, not knowing my affair had been a no-good two-timing liar and scammer. He took the money and I didn't hear from my affair again. He had vanished into thin air. The people at the office didn't know where he had gone. By the next month, when they hadn't seen or heard from the boss, they believed that something was wrong and began to stop coming to work. I was devastated, but I had to keep on going to work every day to save face from my husband, who was doing very well with his startup. However, it reached a point where I couldn't keep going because the clients we had on hold and had taken contract fee from had been storming the office and asking for a refund. I couldn't continue going there, if not they would have my head on a platter. My husband noticed I had stopped going to work and had asked me what was going on, but I had believed he just wanted to ask to gloat to me. I told him that our office had been undergoing some renovations and we had a break. My husband hadn't taken the money from me. I had given it to a man who had been a scam. Now I had no money and couldn't tell anyone about it. Then the trajectory of my life changed when I discovered I was pregnant. Yes, my affair had gotten me pregnant. At that point, I didn't know what to do, and I had already sabotaged the relationship with my husband. So I had done the only thing that I knew to do. I had gotten back with my husband. I wasn't going to give birth to my child without a father figure in her life, even if he wasn't a real father. I had decided to pin the pregnancy on my husband. He had been skeptical about it, but had taken the news and accepted the pregnancy as his own. He hadn't questioned it, and I thought my whole problems had been solved. I had never been more wrong. My husband didn't like me anymore, and I had to fix that because he was the only hope I had, and maybe we could bond over my pregnancy once again. I knew one of my husband's dreams was to have a child. I had to do all the things I could to get my husband back on my side. Luckily, his mother had left, so there wasn't any hindrance that would spoil my name even further. I was trying to get my life back at least just a little bit so I wouldn't miss out. My husband was finally getting a semblance of his life back and mine was falling apart. The best idea I had was to latch onto him once again. You all are free to think whatsoever you want. I had to do what was right for the child growing in my womb and my life. I didn't know there wasn't going to be any point to it. My husband and I lived in peace for about 2 months. I tried my best to be the loving and caring wife I was supposed to be. I tried to show myself that I could love my husband. I cooked him meals, I did whatever he wanted, and my husband was gloating and reveling in it. I wouldn't say it worked, but at least my husband seemed to tolerate me more and he did things for me. Well, the baby maybe, and not me. But my husband tolerated me and I could live with that. Kelvin wasn't going to know that I had an affair with another man, and I was carrying another man's child and cascading it as his. He was never going to find out, and my child was going to live happily after with money. But karma was a real thing, and it made sure I got what I deserved. I didn't know this was going to be the consequences of my actions. I wouldn't have done any of it. I wouldn't have let my career success get to my head if I had known. I would have been submissive and loving and maybe had raised my child with the perfect father figure in her life. Yeah, I know it served me right and I got what I deserved, but I wish I could turn back the clock of time. I would have done everything differently and not let power get into my head. I got a call a month later after my husband and I had reached level ground of tolerance somehow. You would never guess who the call was from. My ex-boss and the man I had had an affair with. I couldn't believe he would have the audacity to call me after what he had done. My affair told me to meet him at a hotel and that he wanted to apologize to me personally. This idiot had the audacity to tell me to come to see him at the hotel. And the hotel was in a different city. He was avoiding all the people he owed and told me he just wanted to see me and settle me because he couldn't bear to think he had done me wrong. I had foolishly gone. I had foolishly packed my bags and gone to see my affair at the hotel one last time, hoping to get my money and get closure. I didn't know it was a trap made up by my husband. I'll explain. I had gone to see him and he had asked me to sign a waiver that I wouldn't tell anyone that I had seen him. If not, he was going to find me and haunt me. I signed the deal desperate to be rid of any trace of the grave evil I had committed, and he gave me back my money. I got back to my city without my husband finding out that I had traveled behind his back. He was busy making money, so he didn't have time to be studying my whereabouts, or so I thought. Everything was fine. I had smoothed out every part of my affair. My husband wasn't going to find out. However, I had slipped. I had messed up. I had forgotten to put away the Johnson toy that had belonged to my affair, and my husband caught it inside the bag that I had packed for a business trip. That had been my last business trip before I found out I had been scammed by my ex-boss and lover. I had forgotten to unpack that box and my husband had wanted to use it for his travels, but then he had unpacked it and the Johnson toy had fallen out. My husband had brought it to me in shock and demanded to know where it was from. In our sexual life, we had never experimented with toys, so he wanted to know who I was experimenting with. I had lied and told him I had just bought it and hadn't used it. Another lie that I was caught in. There was evidence that it had been used before. My husband grew livid and demanded to know if the baby in my womb was actually his baby and not someone else's. I begged and my husband threw me out of his house. He showed me pictures of me sneaking around with my boss on the business trips I was supposed to have been on, and I had been shocked. My husband had hired a PI to find out if I was hiding a secret behind his back. I left Kelvin's house after he had thrown me out and didn't know what to do. I used the little money I had gotten back from my ex-boss and got a motel while I figured out how to solve the mess I had landed myself into. I couldn't believe my husband had found out that I had an affair with another man when I had been married to him, and all it had taken for me to be exposed was a Johnson U I had forgotten in my suitcase. How hadn't I thrown that shit away? But karma wasn't done with me. Recall I had signed a deal to not expose the whereabouts of my ex-boss to the people who had been searching for him. Well, what I hadn't known was that I had signed the rights of the firm over to myself. This meant I was in charge of all the people that their deals hadn't gone through and all the workers my ex-boss owed salary. It had all been my husband's doing. He had confronted my ex-boss and told him to do something, if not, he was going to expose my ex-boss to the world. And my ex-boss had used me as a scapegoat for my husband. I know all this because my husband had told me himself. Everything was on my neck. There had been multiple charges of frauds and people wanting their salaries. Apparently, my ex-boss had been owing them for over 6 months' worth of salaries. But he had always paid me. Was it to lure me to see him as an angel, which he had been in no way? I was arrested and had to use the money I had to settle off the charges. While I had been going through the process of settling people I had never thought to be owing, my husband had sent me divorce papers with strict warning not to pin the child in my womb on him, or he was going to unleash the full force of his wrath on me. He told me that what I had been going through at the moment was small compared to what he would do if I made one wrong move against him. I had signed the divorce papers, but the problems didn't go away. I was being arrested by the police for going against a struck contract. Basically, my whole life has been turned upside down. It had been turned into me paying off deals that I had been no part of. As if that hadn't been enough for my husband, he had made sure to isolate me from our family and friends by telling them I had cheated on him with my boss. The story has made it to the local tabloids, and my name was plastered everywhere for fraud and cheating and client dissatisfaction. Everything I had worked for had crumbled to the ground. There was no hope to salvage my career from the ruin and mess. And then I had ended up losing my child from the stress and anxiety and always looking behind my back. I had to run away to another city. I can't disclose that. There was no one in my former hometown that was on the lookout for me, and the bank had seized the office building and every money in my account. I used the remaining change I had lying around to hightail it out of the country after I had lost my child. Lesson learned. My husband had ruined me for life.